Okay, Brian and Monica in the Metropolitan Museum of Art on a very crowded afternoon, standing before one of the heroic vases as you enter into the Greek gallery. This is described as a geometric crater from the 8th century B.C.E.
Why is it called geometric?
The geometric style is evident on these vases. You could see it in the pattern on the lip up top. You see that meander pattern. And then each individual section is framed. So in a series of rings, almost Olympic rings, around the outside of the vase, we see different shapes and patterns. So lots of geometric pattern.
And even there are some human forms here and animal forms, but they themselves also seem to be kind of reduced to geometric shapes and patterns.
Interesting, though, we do have figural activity on the vase. So as I'm told, early geometric vases only had geometric decoration.
Right.
So moving now into the next century, we start to see a lot more human activity.
What was this vase used for?
It's a very large vase, so you can't imagine storing wine or putting olives in this one, right? I mean, how large is it? It's standing above our heads, but it looks like a few feet. And we know about these vases that they weren't actually kept in the home, right?
No, these in fact were grave markers. The bases have perforations in the bottom, and they would mark graves, and libations would be poured into them, and it would slowly seep into the ground underneath as a kind of offering to the dead.
They're in tough shape, lots of breaks on them, right? This is made of terracotta, baked earth, so it would break into large chunks, so it wouldn't shatter like glass.
That's right.
So many of these are reassembled?
Yes.
Okay, so we do have geometric decoration. We see it on the foot, and as it moves up, we start to see some figural activity, and this is a new trend in geometric art, right?
That's right. And the activity that we see portrayed here goes right along with the vase's function. It's a funerary scene that we see here. We can see there is the deceased lying on a funeral bier, as it's called. We see mourners on either side. They're tearing at their hair in a traditional Greek gesture of mourning as they're assembled on either side of that central funerary scene.
Well, it's interesting. You noted the dead lying horizontally on the funeral bier, not distinguished in any way from the other figures. They're all exactly the same.
That's right. Yes.
So the gesture that they make distinguishes them as living, whereas the deceased is simply lying there.
Correct.
In an Egyptian context, we would see the dead person to be celebrated with a lot of imagery, a lot of symbolism. Here, we don't get much more than the body.
That's correct, and perhaps his family assembled on either side. He's being fanned by these palm fronds, as you can see by figures, to either side.
So, interesting, even in this early period, the Greeks seem to be much more about life than death.
It seems that way.
The focus is on the mourners who are expressing grief rather than on what the deceased did for a living or what status they held in a maybe an Egyptian context.
Right.
Now, you mentioned before the body forms are very simplified. But we have no trouble reading the vase, is that right?
Absolutely. In terms of the procession that we see in that lower register, we can see we have no trouble identifying that there are 3 horses pulling that chariot, even though they share one body. But we can see that the artist is attempting a kind of illusion of depth with overlapping those figures. Exactly.
So very different than we would expect in a Greco-Roman sense, where we would have perspective.
Right, in later times where that would be defined much more illusionistically.
So very flat. We tend to walk right past these in the museum because they feel like they're marking an entranceway, like heraldic lions or something. Certainly this would have had a much more special appeal in ancient Greece, right? This is not an ordinary object.
Yeah, these have a very specialized function. You can't just throw a pot like this any day.
Right.
This is reserved for wealthy Greeks who can afford this kind of thing to mark the graves of their beloved deceased.
So rooms and rooms in museums of vases that probably would have more of a utilitarian function for
right.
wine and oil and such.
Definitely.
This one's something very different.
Absolutely.